Vertus Verbis Podcast disclaimer. The information presented in this podcast is for entertainment, informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended as legal, professional, or financial advice and should not be construed as such. Content and topics shown or discussed may not be accurate nor up-to-date information. Laws and regulations change frequently and vary by location, jurisdiction, and by nation. You should consult with a qualified legal or financial professional for advice specific to your situation. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship. The views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not reflect the views of the podcast as a whole. The host is not responsible for any errors or omissions in the information provided or for any actions taken based on the content of this podcast. We are not liable for any losses, damages, or consequences arising from the use of this information. By listening to this podcast, you agree to hold the host and any guests harmless from any decisions you make, or from any losses, damages, or other claims arising from your use of this information.
Yeah. Okay, welcome back. And in this episode, we're going to do a little bit of a commentary on the puzzle. That's the story that we're going to focus on. Now, obviously, before we go into this, we're going to have to give the usual spoiler alerts. If you haven't watched the puzzle, please go do so. Otherwise, there's going to be certain things that we're going to talk about that will reveal certain plot that may make it less enjoyable for folks that haven't watched it yet. So go watch that first and then come back and listen to the commentary.
Yeah, go leave a like, a comment, and subscribe, right?
Absolutely. We'd appreciate that. Okay. Yeah. So let's go into some context first. I got some questions prepared. First off, the puzzle. Why did you choose that specific title for the story?
Well, actually, originally the title was the Bitcoin puzzle, but that sort of gave away too much of the story. With writing this, I definitely wanted to kind of keep some stuff in the mysterious to kind of just have the listener kind of go through the process of learning what's going on. That was always the intent. And so what I looked for in the title was maybe like a little bit about Bitcoin itself being a puzzle. Like it's a code that is very hard to crack.
Right.
You can't really solve it. And that's something that's very intriguing to me. And of course, the other part of it is in the story, the characters are supposed to solve a puzzle as well too. And those two things kind of work hand in hand, especially for the story which I was trying to tell, which is about the person's life of, working with puzzles, and of course, solving them and kind of his love for puzzles.
That's right.
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, cool. What inspired you to want to write this particular story?
Well, a little bit was in the beginning to kind of write something to kind of get my thoughts out there first. It's I haven't written a story in a really long time, so writing this particular story was just my way to kind of get a refresher on how to write, I guess. And I had a particular I don't know how else to put it. It's difficult to write dialogue, right? So it was a challenge to me to kind of go into this and kind of think about like what kind of dialogue do I want to have. I actually did a prior story to this one that actually didn't quite work out. And that was because I was trying to skip a lot of dialogue, try to have the narrator do most of the talking. And for some things that might work, but for a whole story to be like that is very difficult to kind of get my point across. So this story partly was to kind of exercise that, but I also wanted to see if I can write something that, of course, is related to Bitcoin, how it kind of played a role in someone's everyday life versus what the technology is about. It's kind of given that the technology has been adopted by the masses. Very few people don't know what it is. So that's kind of the standpoint. It's like, okay, what type of world would this be like if something were to happen, and how is Bitcoin related to this type of situation?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, that's cool. The next question is, what is the moral of your story, and why is that important?
Moral of the story. Okay, so the moral of the story is there's a couple of things that are kind of like floating in my head. Definitely you want to be talking to your kids, or kids talking to their parents about finances and wills and stuff like that. I think that's a very important thing that people tend to ignore and leave till the very last minute or not discuss at all. That leads to more trouble than it actually helps, because of not talking about the death and the after part of it, you feel like, oh, I can prolong it, or maybe when the time comes, then I'll say it. Sometimes that's too late.
Exactly.
And that kind of leads to more issues, especially if you think you're doing it for the better of the other part. Like if you're
Mm,
thinking like, oh, my kids, they don't need to know about me dying, or don't want to talk about it because I'm afraid of it. Like, yes, these are all true, but the moral really is that you should be kind of talking to your kids and families and loved ones. We've heard many stories about people when they pass away realizing there's a key to a safety deposit box
sure.
and
Sure.
don't
Yeah.
know where that box is,
Oh Lord.
or there was a box but no one had the key. Like all these
Right.
things that
That's
are
troublesome.
not that are better said than not.
Yeah.
And that's really the kind of the point I wanted to drive home, is
Hmm.
that people should be talking about these things more and shouldn't be trying to shy away from it.
Absolutely. I think a lot of parents, like, obviously when your kids are young, um, it probably wouldn't make sense. But obviously, in your story, the kids
Yeah.
have become adults, and the
Yeah.
father still hasn't talked to them about any of that. And that's,
Hard, right?
yeah, it's not a difficult. I mean, it's not an easy topic to discuss, but it is very important, especially if there is if there's a legacy of some sort to be left behind for your heirs. It would only
Mm.
make sense. Again, to your point, it's part of planning, right? So I totally get you on that.
And
Cool.
and the second part is, how to handle your Bitcoin too, right? Like,
Hmm.
is this the best way, like, to kind of leave these trails and crumbs of evidence to kind of lead to your ultimate stash? Like,
Right.
what if someone else finds it? What if you get robbed?
Yeah.
What if they don't even know you have it because you held it so secretively, right? Like, all
Hmm.
these things can happen. And do I have the answer to it? No. I wonder the same thing sometimes.
Sure.
And to be that makes it kind of scary, right?
Yes.
Like, not knowing what the best solution is kind of scary sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess it talks to the maturity of the technology, right? Like, we
Yeah.
do have to kind of wait until there are better, more well-rounded solutions. I mean, they do exist. Without going into
Yes.
details on that, but it's just,
Yeah.
is it at a point where Joe Schmo can easily do it? Not really. Like, it does require a
Hmm.
certain level of investigation, research, understand what's out there, and then deciding what works best for that person or for themselves,
Exactly.
right? There's no
Exactly. Yeah.
one thing that does it all and it's perfect. I mean, if that was the case, there'd be no risk. So that, I think, to
Exactly.
your point, the
Yeah.
risk is the fear, right? Is the
Hmm.
fact that there's this uncertainty, in terms of how to keep something secure, and yet secure enough that your heirs can retrieve it, right? I think,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's pretty
It
cool.
can't be impossible, right? It can't
Exactly.
be like only you thought of this decipher, and without you, it can't be done. I mean, you don't want to be too easy either, right? Like in this story, like, if it's too easy, it gets missed, right? And
Hmm.
and I don't know if that's a thing or not. It could be, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it kind of goes. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. The next question is: did you come across anything of note or that was interesting while you were creating your story?
Yep. For sure. I kind of wanted to include the story with the blockchain technology in general.
Mm,
So I really wanted to find a way to make it work, even though Bitcoin and a lot of other cryptocurrencies use the blockchain. That is what it is. I just thought that instead of just looking at as currency, is there anything else that you would like to store in there? And of
hmm.
course, one of the
Right.
things that always came up when I was first introduced to Bitcoin was, oh, in the future you can write your land title and your
Mm,
deed on the chain, and
right.
so that no one can mess with it. And I was like, oh, that's cool, right? That's a
Yeah.
really interesting idea. And so I kind of try to expand on that a little bit more to kind of be like, okay, well, this is important. Yes, your house, who owns it, you definitely want that stored away safely and retrievable and unmodifiable unless all parties agree upon it.
Hmm.
True, 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 right?
Hmm.
But like, okay, well, what about like last will and testaments, right? I'm sure someone's already thought about it and put it in, but it's like, how would that sound like, when someone really wanted something set for its heirs to hear? Not just anybody. Like, you
Yeah.
can see that there's someone took that block or put in a message there, but then it had to be accessible, right, by the
Yes.
right people.
Right.
And then So it's kind of like, okay, well, how does that work, right? And that kind of tied into me looking into like, oh, like ancestry type of situations
Mm-hmm.
where, you have to kind of find out, oh, this is my uncle from like third removed, like,
Sure.
cousin or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Like those things kind of come together, and and so it's just kind of like looking into these things were kind of neat to kind of bring them all together in a story in a I hope was subtle. It's meant to be subtle.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, way of conveying new technology.
Okay, cool. Next question is this story a one-off or will it have sequels to it?
Good question. um, is it a one-off? I don't want to say it's a one-off.
Mm,
I don't know yet right now. Will let the I will let the audience decide on that one.
okay.
If they feel like there's a connection between my stories, great. If they don't, that's fine.
Mm,
I have some loose ideas, but I'm not committed to them either.
sure.
If I find a good topic, I like to write about it.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, there is the fact that I do like putting in some hints of things here and there.
Mm-hmm.
Whether those things will be payoff or they'll lead to different things, then you just have to listen to the other stories and see for yourself, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome. Okay. Do you think this story is relatable to people who don't understand Bitcoin?
I hope so. I definitely hope that. I mean, my hope is that even if they don't know about Bitcoin, they can still listen to the story and get some kind of entertainment or enjoyment out of it.
Mm-hmm.
That's the most important part.
Absolutely.
Um, and then the moral of the story, of course, if they understand that, it can be related to any type of currency, whether it's fiats,
Sure.
crypto, or Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and then of course part of me thinks about like it's not it's not relatable. They don't understand Bitcoin, but maybe they will start thinking about it once they
Mm,
hear the story.
mm-hmm.
That's a definitely a win for me writing the story.
Sure.
Then at least they are aware of like, oh, this something like this exists or could exist.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's interesting. Let me just take a look at it. I think that's all I ask for. I hope that someone finds it fun.
Yeah.
That's really what it is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
Okay, cool. Where did you come up with the character names? Like did they have any additional meaning behind them?
Some of them do. Some of the names were used in my prior story because I didn't know if I was going to go with the first draft of this story. Let's say it definitely evolved from there, and because of that, I kept some of the names from there, and the meanings
Mm,
behind the names are not personal. One thing I try to avoid is really putting in names of people that I know very
of,
closely.
of course.
It's not tied to anybody. Even in the future, if I do tend to use someone's name, I it's not because I know that person and I'm trying to reflect them in the
No.
story. It's just that sometimes the name just kind of fits.
Sure.
Ultimately, I want the names to be pretty generic, I
Yeah.
think, because that actually leads to a better um, immersiveness,
Mm-hmm.
because then it's like you don't have to worry about like, oh, this guy's name is like super eccentric or anything like that. Now there are times where right now I'm kind of like brainstorming about other future topics where I think the name is important and there's more thought into the name itself.
Mm-hmm.
But as of this story for itself, there is no specific reason why they were named the names they were. It's
Sure.
just that it was the first thing that came to my head.
Yep. Makes sense. Makes sense.
And it kind of fit, like, oh, this one's like,
Sounds good, right?
Robert, that one's
Yeah.
Linda, and they could be short form to like Rob and Lynn's,
Sure.
like a parent would call their kids because they don't
Mm-hmm.
really call them by their full names,
Right.
unless they get in trouble, right? So those are things where I thought like, okay, this works. Let's get the story
Mm-hmm.
uh, out, and the names don't necessarily mean too much in this story that I'm writing. Yeah,
Gotcha.
that I wrote.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Um, I guess final question is looking back, if you could
Mm.
add, change, or remove anything or any one thing, what would it be and why?
Yeah, I think due to some feedback, I think, and it makes sense to me, is I started out writing the story thinking that I could make a very interesting plot twist to
Mm.
the story. I think I personally love reading about plot twists
Hmm.
and seeing it in movies, and
Right.
good ones are really stick with you.
Yes.
But it's hard.
Sure.
It's
Yeah.
very hard to write something that you want to get your point across, that is related to certain technology, and then at the end of the day, it also gives you a good twist.
Hmm.
So, um, if I were to go back and change that thing, I wouldn't know exactly how, but if I had time to kind of relook at it, I might try to drive that a little bit stronger as well too, rewrite certain things to kind of make it have a twist to it, which would be fun. I don't think as of right now the story needs it.
Yeah.
But it would have been great to be able to include that in the first story that I've been writing since a long time. Yeah.
Got you. Yeah, I agree with you. Like I too enjoy a nice twist in the way stories
Yeah.
go. It gives it
Good plot
a
twist.
right. It gives it more depth. Right. Sometimes we've seen stories where they have multiple twists. And you're kind of mind blown. Right.
Yeah.
But it can get out of hand too as well. Right. And I get you.
It
Like
can.
yeah, especially if the story doesn't really need it and you try to force one in, it feels very
Yeah.
heavy handed. And yeah, I agree. It would be more organic. Would be a better way of approaching a story. Yeah, I agree with you on that
Yeah.
one. Cool.
And
Mhm.
as just a general overview, as I'm writing this, things are kind of coming, like ideas and stuff like that as
Sure.
I'm writing it,
Yeah.
which is, for me, it's not a very good way of writing, as I find out, because I can go on to a very different direction.
Sure.
I actually tend to go back to what I kind of learned in school, which is like to have like a, story outline and kind of go
Hmm.
through these points. So you kind of hit
Exactly.
the points that you need to hit.
Yeah.
Now, how those things kind of come together and how they fit, that can be free flowing, right? But not having the structure for me is actually not a good thing. So I'm actually learning a little bit about
That's
that
cool.
as I'm kind of getting back into writing.
Makes sense. Makes sense. There's a reason why I guess it works out, right? The structuring. Yep. I
Yeah.
fully agree.
Hmm.
Okay, so we're gonna pivot and we're gonna do
Sure.
basically we're gonna play the puzzle in the background. Well, just in case for folks that are listening, make sure
Yeah.
you go watch the puzzle because when we talk about the commentary, there will be spoilers. So best enjoyed by itself alone, and then come back and of course listen to this actual commentary. So this is the second spoiler warning. I'm gonna kick it
Yeah.
off. Here
Okay.
is the video. So again,
Yep.
our
There's
usual
our intro.
podcast
Hmm.
intro.
Yep.
One of the things I wanted to talk about was the blurry man piece, right? I think that's very important for me at least, because
Yep.
with the Twilight Zone, there was always that introduction by Ron Serling
Oh
where
yeah.
he
Yeah. It
talks a
sets the
little bit about
stage.
it. Right. And in this
Absolutely.
case, we're using a little bit of that inspiration where, there's this
Hmm.
man in the shadows. I think on the internet, they call him the blurry man. And because a lot of
Yeah.
times he's kind
Yeah.
of in the shadows, right? And so that's kind of
Yeah.
the same
Yeah.
idea.
It's good.
Yeah.
Sets the mood too.
Yeah, I quite like it. And so it's become basically our go-to template intro. Like that's always the lead in, just like it is for
Yeah.
Twilight Zone. Yeah.
And Outer Limits too.
Oh
They
yes,
do
that's
do that.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. It's only the outros that are customized.
That's right.
Hmm.
So this is the scene where everything starts. It's supposed to be the funeral for the father, and so yeah, everyone's gathered around, and of course, the father was well loved and well respected by a lot of different people. So I thought it'd be nice to generate a scene where it was like full of an audience. Actually, the first scene I generated on this, there was like nobody in there, which is kind of creepy.
Oh wow.
Um, and so I had to kind of actually tell the AI to kind of revamp that. And I think you were asking me a little bit before about the
Mm-hmm.
music. So
Mm-hmm.
I did choose a more jazz type of style because I wanted more of an upbeat tone to this
Mm-hmm.
experience.
Right.
It's more of a celebration of life than a
Yes.
mournful, like death
Yes.
of a loved one.
Yeah.
And so it leads to then, of course, them going into the cremation area,
Yes.
and usually this comes with its own vibe of like
Cold.
a very simple room that just
Right.
has one job to do,
Right.
and definitely want to convey that it gave off like a very bland feel to it, but at the
Mm.
same time it's very kind of like the final chapter, final point where you would say goodbye to your loved ones and the last time you would see them before of course they hit the button and kind of go forward with that. And
Mm-hmm.
there's usually some sentimental things that they would place or put in with the whole process, right? And that was kind of like the start of the story, right? Like kind of like, hey, what's going on
Right.
with these things, right? Is there more to it, kind of thing, right? And that's also lay out the foundation of there's a lot of costs involved in these type of uh,
Ceremony.
situations if it's not
Yeah.
planned properly. So funeral cost and it takes time out of, like, not that it takes that much time, but still it interrupts the person's life
The flow. Yeah.
to get through something like this. So
Right.
there's a loss of time, there's a loss of money, even though there isn't really much that are expected to kind of get from it, aside from the obvious stuff, like saying goodbye to your loved
Of
ones and everyone
course.
else having a chance to do so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, I definitely picked up on the music. It wasn't the somber, sad type. It was definitely a little bit more uplifting. So it gave that feeling
Yeah.
of like, yeah, celebration of life. Totally. So now this scene
Mhm.
here, this is the lawyer's office.
Yeah, so this is the lawyer's office, and this is just the part in the story where I wanted to use to convey some of the technologies available that has been made commonly used in everyday life. Mainly like the blockchain network.
Mm-hmm.
Just not just for cryptocurrency only, but like for use of storing other important information.
Mm-hmm.
The idea came from having it heard about, like, Bitcoin or other blockchains can store, like, the house titles and deeds and stuff like that on it. And so I kind of thought about having something that you could store for your loved ones to kind of go back to listen to. And also in this case, like a private passage or, message that they want to pass down to their uh,
Right. Loved
loved
ones.
ones,
Yeah.
kids, and so forth, right?
Yeah.
So that's why the scene is there to kind of set up that information being shown, and of
Mm-hmm.
course, it kind of leads the moments of the towards the end of the story, building up to it. So it kind of gives them something to kind of look for and search.
Mm-hmm.
There's I think in the next part here, they're going to be looking at the phone,
At some
and
point.
how to sign
Yeah.
in and stuff like that. That's
But
also like technology that we currently have, but
right.
we haven't quite got to a point where it's. I mean, it's arguable, right? You could say it's very important these days. Our fingerprint, our eyes can scan for things that the phone already picks up,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So that in itself is already established. It's like, can
Mm-hmm.
we bring that one step forward and kind of marry that with the blockchain and
Yeah.
information on there? So
Totally.
that's kind of where this was kind of heading.
Makes sense.
What I was trying to world build for this part of the story.
Yeah. And one of the things that came to my mind was it intentional to have the lawyer's office look so messy in some ways?
Yeah, it's supposed to show that this lawyer wasn't really the top of the rung,
Mm,
like he
mm-hmm.
wasn't really expensive supposedly,
I
because
see.
his job wasn't really to give out the information
Right.
that was so vital. His job was just to kind of gatekeep and be like, hey guys, here's the keys to your new car or to your
Mm-hmm.
house or whatever. He's just trying to act out what needs of him, and it's
Right.
very little. It actually, I try to in the story, I try to put him, the file of importance even for the lawyer was very far away. Like, it
Right.
wasn't immediately on his desk. It wasn't that important. These
Right.
guys came in. He was
Absolutely.
very nonchalant about their
Mm-hmm.
what they were going through, because they weren't very valuable clients. He had one task. He had to hand the keys over to the kids,
Yeah.
and the kids took it from there. So and I think the main character, or the son and character, Robert, in the story, he realized that as well too. So when there's something that was discussed in the passage to them privately, he didn't want to openly discuss that with this lawyer that they didn't know anything about.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
They had to
Absolutely.
take that away
Mm-hmm.
into a more private setting before
Mm-hmm.
they could talk about it, because of how much value Bitcoin is worth at this time.
Yeah.
In the story, it's far greater than what we have it as right now,
Mm-hmm.
which is what US dollars, what, $60,000 a
Sure.
Bitcoin,
Yeah.
right? And I think the will had it in the story said 256. 256 just kind of like a callback to like computer memory
Nice.
sites.
Nice. Yeah.
But it could be anything, right? That's
Sure.
not really super important, but it's kind
Yeah.
of funny for me.
Also
Yeah.
on the cell phone, it has it's like, it was like a DNA strand, right? I think that was intentional.
Yeah, that was intentional.
Mhm.
I did ask the AI to generate a DNA logo.
Nice.
It's supposed to signify like a chain, like a blockchain,
Yeah. Yeah.
and it's unique. So
Yeah.
that kind of played in part of the story very well.
Mhm.
Yeah, and then we have the house. This is like a generic white picket fence house. The AI decided not to generate a driveway, but I guess it could be on the backside, right? It doesn't really matter. But anyhow, it's to show that this is like their family home that they grew up in,
Yeah.
and they're coming back to it now to kind of find out what the puzzle is about.
Right. Right.
A little bit about the puzzle as well too. I like reading when I was reading Lord of the Rings and stuff like that. There
Mm.
was a lot of like songs and poetry that's very well written, and I kind
Mhm.
of want to play a little bit of homage to that. It was fun to kind of just do a little bit of a short verse,
Yes.
and to kind of like set up the scene and stage of like what the characters are used to seeing from their father,
Yeah.
and kind of play along with that, and kind of the father trying to bring the kids back together because they may have grown apart over
Right.
the time. It's kind of
Right.
like to signify that they're coming back together. They should kind of do something together for fun.
Right. That
This
how
was
oh,
yeah.
I was just saying
Sorry, go
that
ahead.
that house fits, right? It looks like one of those homes where
Yeah,
people
just one
grew
of
up
those
in.
those generic houses.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then this one took a little bit of time to generate because apparently
Oh,
computers don't really like to generate me a round opening for a cupboard. Even this is not perfect. It's got a square door on a
looks great.
round opening,
Yeah,
but it does lend itself to the creepy factor, I
it
guess. It's
does.
kind of off-putting and kind of not quite real,
Right.
and
And
which is
easy.
great. And I
Yeah.
liked it when I saw it too. So
Yeah.
I was
I
like,
love
okay,
it
I'm gonna
too.
keep this.
Yeah.
Yep. And there was no reason why it had to be round except that it fit my poetry.
I think that might also be the appeal that YouTube finds it interesting, right? Because from what we could
Maybe.
see in the stats, a lot of
Yeah.
people were interested in the short related to that
Yeah.
with that thumbnail. Yeah.
That's true. That's true.
That
That works, right?
sure.
This one here is the last part of the part of the story where they actually open it up and you can see it's not round anymore. So
Hmm.
obviously we lost some of that in the translation of things, but it demonstrated it's supposed to be cluttered in there. It's supposed to
Hmm.
be hard to find.
Yeah.
And there was one coin left over because it fell out of either the jar or the can that was holding it.
Right.
And so that it could focus the attention of the main character actually picking up the coin,
Right.
realizing that the puzzle was solved, and indeed they had lost it because they had
Mm,
cremated those coins. With
absolutely.
the whole
Yeah.
cremation process. So yeah, that's
Nice.
kind of the thought process of how the kind of all came out.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for sharing that with us. I think that was interesting.
Yeah, thanks for
Okay.
having me.
Okay. Thank you.